My name is Maria Jawad, and I work for the Public Works Board. And I am here to moderate this session on funding GSI opportunities. And I just want to start off saying, however, that it is an absolute honor and privilege to be part of the GSI host committee and hold space here for the funding opportunities for green stormwater infrastructure. It's really an exciting time. And before I get in and introduce our speakers, hand the mic over to them, I wanted to offer just a few reflections that I've had, particularly around the theme of the conference, money as medicine, as was inspired and popularized by Edgar Villanueva through his provoking call to action on decolonizing wealth. I think every one of us is really on a unique path of healing and growth, ultimately connection with the natural world and all the life that exists in our world. And professionally, we are all here in some way touched by the power and opportunity to bring resources and infrastructure to communities, small and large, throughout the Salish Sea. And how that can be done is it can be done in a healing way, or it could be done in a way that creates additional harm and trauma. And the speakers that we have sitting here today have some ideas and experiences to share. We have agreed, though, that we wanted our presentations to be as short as possible because this is a listening moment as well. And we want to have a conversation about how ultimately to bring more medicine or healing solutions and energy forward for future growth in the funding of GSI. The last piece I wanted to plug here is that what I've heard from our conversations that we had at the beginning, the wisdom of this community, is that our human existence, the things that will last is the land and the earth. I keep hearing that. And it's the land that gives life to the communities that we are working to create space and connection. It's the communities that we need to have adapt and thrive into the future. And stormwater infrastructure is key to meeting those needs. And I wanted to just make that piece clear before I introduced Karen Burkholz, who is the Executive Director of the Public Works Board. She's going to kick off our conversation, sharing with us all the different opportunities ahead for funding of stormwater infrastructure and of other public works projects that the Public Works Board has available. And Karen has, over the course of her career, worked at the nexus between environmental protection and economic development, both with the Northwest Forest Plan, the Puget Sound National Estuary Program, the Mississippi River Critical Area in Minnesota. Karen holds a master's from the Evans School of Public Affairs and Governance. We enjoy having her at the helm as Executive Director of the Public Works Board. After she gives her presentation, we're going to pause and give you an opportunity to ask any specific questions of sort of Karen and the Public Works Board. And then I will then hand over the mic to Tracy Stanton, who is also here as an Executive Director of the Emerald Alliance. She'll give more context to the ways that we can rethink funding structures and position ourselves and community to be able to best leverage the resources needed for communities to define and lead in actualizing community self-determination. So excited to hear that conversation. Tracy has over 20 years of experience in environmental policy and conservation finance strategies. In her current work, leading the Emerald Alliance for People, Nature, and Community, which is a regional initiative focused on connecting and collaborating across the many organizations and efforts to prioritize equitable investments in natural infrastructure across the Puget Sound. After we have heard from both Karen and Tracy, we hope to then open the floor and have a discussion with you all, how to partner more authentically with our communities so that the voice and the action of the community is represented in the projects that get funding. And so I now will be passing the mic over to Karen Burkholz.
Thank you. Maria is on my team, in case you couldn't tell. She works for me. Also working for me is Max Wedding and back, and he is the Western Washington Project Manager for the Public Works Board. And Chair Catherine Gardo is here as well. She's the chair of the Public Works Board. She's standing in the back. And I hope you'll indulge me. It's Friday afternoon, and I want to have some fun. And I hope that you guys will play with me in this, okay? First, a little bit about me. At the end of the day, I just like to chill. And one of my favorite things to do when I chill is to watch movies. And my team may know that I've been sort of on a Ryan Reynolds kick for the last 6 months or so. And one of my favorite movies is The Atom Project. And what we're going to do today is a little bit of time travel. And so I hope that you will indulge me. Imagine the opening scene of the movie. We're out in space, and all you see is stars and cosmos and all this beautiful stuff that is space. And then you see the year 2018. And under that, the words, time travel exists. You just don't know it yet. And so we're going to practice that. And what we do is imagine that you're in your cool spaceship that was actually designed by some cool guys down in Australia. And it doesn't look like anything that you've seen in Star Wars or Star Trek or any of that cool stuff. It's really, really fun. And you have Ryan Reynolds, who's playing Adam Reed. And Adam Reed is a pilot. And his father was a scientist who invented time travel and improved the functionality of wormholes so that you could actually create a wormhole to travel through space, which I think is so cool. And so imagine that we're sitting in the jet. I'm going to plug 3 buttons, bam, bam, bam. And then you'll see this screen come up and it's going to say ready. And out in front of you appears a wormhole. And I press the button and bam, we're through. And we're back in 1985. And I'll tell you why 1985 matters in our state, in Washington. The recession of 1979 hit this state really, really hard. The governor, the legislature had to enact something called the lottery. The lottery raised about 20 million a year. Unemployment rates were in double digits. The state actually was unable to pay its bills. Governor Spellman at the time did the lottery, did a whole bunch of things, but come 1985, the job was not done. Washington State was lagging the nation in terms of economic recovery. Our unemployment rate was close to 10%, whereas the nation was around 7%. While Boeing was adding jobs, 3,000, our timber industry, the wood products industry, was constricting. It had lost 38% of its market share. We were losing competitiveness to Canada and to Southeast United States. Counties like Mason County were experiencing horrendous job losses, mills closing, 600 people out of work. And this was just the beginning. So what did Governor Booth Gardner do on his first day of office in 1985? He said there are certain things that he wants to address. Number 1, funding for higher ed. Number 2, environmental policy, environmental protections, environmental stewardship. And third was funding for higher ed. So we came along, and 1985, also something magical and wonderful happened, that the legislature enacted RCW 43155. And wonder of wonders, it created the Public Works Board, and it set up the Public Works Assistance Account. And the account came about because cities, realtors were saying, we have huge infrastructure problems in this state. We have issues where discharge into Puget Sound is contaminating not just waterways for salmon, but for shellfish, hurting industries, hurting livelihoods. Tribal fishers were telling people, be careful how many fish you consume from the Puget Sound because they may be contaminated. That's the backdrop against which the Public Works Board was created. And this huge rallying cry from jurisdictions saying, we need a fund source for infrastructure. So flash forward now, we're going to go back into the time machine and we're going to go to the late 80s, like 89, 90. And what's happening then? my goodness, spotted owl, the whole embargo on federal forests, unemployment rates in places like Skamania County and Clallam County and Jefferson County here around the Salish Sea up in double digits, 18%, 22% in Skamania County back then. And we were out there doing the Timber Trust Fund. We used to be called a trust fund. We called the Timber Trust Fund program, which was helping rural communities with their infrastructure. And it was the but for of the infrastructure, except for the extension of this water system, except for the extension of the sewer system, they were not going to be able to diversify away from wood products industries. And so we did that for a while. And I worked on that through the Northwest Forest Plan for 9 years when I was in the governor's office, and fun times. But the persistent conditions of rural communities have not changed. And I think that you feel that all around Puget Sound. I think that you feel that even in urban Puget Sound, where only recently did we do something like the Georgetown Wet Works to deal with the stormwater issues that were infiltrating schools. Each time, there was a storm event, there was flooding. And I'll get to that in just a bit. Let's flash forward now to 2007. And Karen is recruited to go work, that's me, is recruited to go work for the city of Minneapolis in Minnesota. So we've just catapulted through another time warp. We're now ahead. What's happening then? The city got some funding along with the county and the metropolitan region to improve not just transit within 2 downtown one-way couples, but as a part of that, to improve stormwater treatment, because there was significant inflow and infiltration in downtown Minneapolis. And that matters because where does Minneapolis get their drinking water? The Mississippi River. And so what do? They use something called Swedish soils, which is engineered soils. And we actually had a team from Sweden come over to Minneapolis, and they talked about their research in trees and what do they need to do to survive in urban environments. And they looked at Stockholm. They went to Germany, and Stockholm, where they had bricks right up against the stem of a tree, and the tree is trying to survive in this courtyard, but not doing very well. In Germany, they went to a World War II bunker, and if you can imagine this curved structure with grass and moss growing on it and a tree growing on it. And you're going, how can a tree survive on a bunker? They open the door into the bunker, and what do they see but roots dangling down in the air? And it's a really happy tree, but it's not in soils. So what do we do in Minneapolis? We put in trenches, and in those trenches are rocks. And within the rocks, you plant the trees. And around the trees, you put the public art. And you put the drinking fountains, and you put the bike racks. And so what happened is that it improved the function and values downtown. It improved public amenities. It improved the pedestrian realm, if you want to talk to planner speak, which I can do. But it made for a beautiful town, and it improved air quality because the buses that used to stack up back to back were weaving in and out. And so it was just making a lot more sense. So what did that lead to? That led to our region getting a Sustainable Communities grant and it's a partnership from EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, HUD, Human and Urban Development, and US DOT. And there was a national competition for these dollars. PSRC, King County, Seattle got one of the $5 million grants. Minneapolis, St. Paul got the other. And my story there is that it was a lesson in our region in what it means to work equitably and to really significantly, intentionally, and humbly involve communities that have been underserved and underrepresented, the ones that have been always isolated or marginalized, like the Rondo community where the Interstate 94 just plowed right on through and destroyed them, or North Minneapolis that was intentionally isolated, not just from itself, but from the rest of the city and from the river, the public realm, because of the interstate highway system too. And so what we did, it was a $5 million grant. We set aside $750,000 for outreach and engagement, but it wasn't run by the Met Council. It wasn't run by us in Minneapolis. No, we brought in 3 consulting firms, not for profits, that taught us about what it meant to engage. And we said, okay, you set up the program. You run the program. You award the dollars to the community. And the only thing that the Met Council did as the funding entity was approve what those grants were doing. So all of the decision-making went out to the community. It was shared with the community. There was a scientific study that went alongside all of this work. And the team actually, there's a report you can read that talks about, did Met Council feel they learned from this? Did they feel that they really shared power? Did the community feel like they were heard? And those things were yes. And are they still implementing this now, years after? Yes, they are. That's really cool. So let me flash forward again. We're going to go time warp. Remember, I mentioned the timber programs, and I mentioned the fact that we had something created in '85 called the Public Works Assistance Account. And I mentioned spotted owl, and I mentioned the downturn in timber. And why is that important? Because in our state, proceeds from state timber sales fund K through 12 education. And if there are no revenues go down for K-12, then what are you going to do? 2012, the McCleary decision that stated that the state was woefully underinvesting in K-12 education. And it behooved the legislature, it behooved the governor to fix that problem. What did they do? They looked at the Public Works Assistance Account, our funding source. So from 2012 through 2018, we had no money, none. It was all diverted to K-12 education, the ELTA, the Education Legacy Trust account. Sad times for the PWB. Really sad times for the communities that we serve, who had looked to us for years as being a reliable, easy to use fund source for their infrastructure systems. So then about 2018, the legislature started appropriating funds again for the Public Works Board. In 2018, it was bond dollars. And then they changed our statute around. We're now a competitive program, which is actually better. And we've been doing cycles now in 2019, 2021, and we just did one last year. And so with that, I'd like to flash forward to now and why we are so dang excited about right now. And I'll tell you about what we do and who we fund and what we're hoping to do in the future. So we can go to the next slide. I'll move. So you can see we do roads, we do domestic water, bridges, stormwater, solid waste recycling, wastewater. Miscellaneous can be things like lot, down in Thurston County, where you've got Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey all coordinating with the county around wastewater treatment facilities. It can be an irrigation district. That's another too. And then in 2019, we started doing broadband infrastructure. So we are bringing high fiber internet to unserved communities statewide. And that's in partnership with 2 other programs, the SBO, State Broadband Office, and CURB, Community Economic Revitalization Board. And this is who we can fund. From 1985 until 2019, it was cities, counties, special purpose districts. And we funded those infrastructure systems that you can see there. In 2019, our world changed when we started doing broadband, because that introduced private sector ISPs, tribal governments, public ports. We can do all of that with PWB now, and it's a whole different level of engagement and a whole different way of doing funding. And so these are some of the projects that we are able to do and how we are able to help communities achieve the vision and the goals that they have for their infrastructure systems. This is the one that I mentioned, the WET system, and you can see it if you're headed to the stadiums. Catherine toured it, I think 2 summers ago, and very exciting facility. These are 2 others. We have an emergency program that helps if something happens that's unforeseen, like an act of nature, or a system fails spontaneously and all of a sudden you don't have water anymore. We can help with that. These 2, Quilcene up in Jefferson County, small timber town, replacing their only water tank, really important project. The one in the middle there, it's sort of hard to tell, But if you can imagine, there was a mudslide that washing out the road. The road was essential because it was the tsunami evacuation route, also the emergency access route to the hospital. And so that's a project that we funded there. And then Westport, you think that pumps and things like that are really important, but people expect their infrastructure systems to work and be reliable. And then if something happens and they can't be, then they notice. But that's what that project was about. Closer to home, one of the things that's really cool about PWB, I think, and I'm not biased at all, is that we can do with one application, we can address multiple systems. In this first project here that you see, the Alderwood, we are not only improving traffic flow and function and stormwater function, but in so doing, we're improving habitat for salmon by replacing or removing culverts. And that's all with one award. The one in the middle, actually, I want to go to the last one. This one is really, really cool. This is a culvert replacement in the city of Bremerton. Of course, it's improving function of stream flows, but there are always add-ons here. Bremerton also has an add-on to this project, improved ADA accessibility for a park. And then it also, because we were changing the way that the water would flow, it opened up a public beach that had been closed for a really long time. So there was a benefit to the humans. And it then led to the opening up of a shellfish bed that had been closed for a very long time. And again, improving that for the habitat for shellfish. And that means the industry too. And so that's some of the stuff we can do. This is why I'm excited and why Catherine and I won't be sleeping this weekend and why we want all of you to channel really positive mojo, because on Monday, we expect to hear the Senate Ways and Means, the capital budget. And we're hoping to be in there for 400 million for the upcoming biennium so that we can keep doing the kind of work that I've been describing. Next week is Senate. Catherine's going to be testifying. The following week is House. And so what does that mean for all of you? If we get that, we're going to be opening funding cycle. So pay attention on TVW, because we're always on TVW the first Friday of each month. And in May, when we're over in Spokane, you may see that the board is going to be opening funding cycle. And that's really exciting because that's one of the best ways that we, as a revolving loan fund, can help communities across our state. Our second thing is, and you may think this is sort of geeky, but I think it's really sort of cool, is that we have a collaborative that includes Public Works Board, Department of Commerce, Department of Health, Ecology, Transportation, and the Transportation Improvement Board. And it's called, we call it SYNC. In legislation, it has something more complicated. But at any rate, what we want to do is a data dashboard. I didn't mean to say it that way, data dashboard. And that way we can show where the investments are happening all across the state. And importantly, if we see that there's like an investment desert where we haven't been able to reach a community, we can go in and figure out why. Is it because they don't know about us as funding sources? Is it they think that they would never be competitive? Is it that they need technical assistance so they can learn how to apply? Or they need to do some planning work, like update their CFP, their capital facilities plans. So we can go out and actually do that kind of engagement and help communities be ready for the funding that we can offer them. And that's the 490,000 that we have there. Okay. Am I almost done?
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta go. At any rate, we are very committed to DEI. Ever since Catherine was chair, we were pursuing fiscal sustainability, equity, and being climate change resilient. And in January, we enacted our DEI statement. It's posted on our website. We're also going to be posting it in 7 other languages. And we're really proud about that. And I think that's all I want to say, because I already talked about that. So thanks. And that's our board.
Thank you for that, Karen. Sorry to mix your slides.
Yeah, and I just don't know what time we landed in. Let's just say we're back here now. We've come back through the wormhole. We're back in 2023.
All right, perfect. I'm going to hand this over to you. Click along. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really sorry that we changed up the speaker order today because I was supposed to go first, and that's not an easy act to follow. So, wow. I'm going to take off Karen's time travel, and part of what I'm going to talk about is where we go from. Thank you. First and foremost, advance the slides. 10 years from now, what's the legacy of all the infrastructure investments that we've been talking about, that we're anticipating, that we know is coming through our federal partners, down through our state agencies? What's the legacy of that? How are we going to use that to advance social justice, community resilience, and lasting benefit along what we've been talking about in terms of decolonizing wealth, money is medicine, and the other end of that spectrum is self-determination at the community scale. So before I jump into that, just to give you a little context of where I'm coming from in the work of the Emerald Alliance, we grew out of a research project out of the University of Washington. We've been at our regional collaborative work, trying to connect efforts across the conservation community, predicated on this idea that our legacy is our land. And our land really is this representation of an interconnected system. The natural system is connected, and the way we engage in that system across our region is also connected. Glasses on, off. One of the core components of how we are focusing our work has really come at this intersection of nature and health, and all of the infrastructure funding that I had a terrific advisory committee. We saw this opportunity coming, and we wanted to think about a new environmental collaborative. Where is our value add in this space? It's a very robust, rich community of conservation organizations and government entities. Where can we add value to all that work? And it came in really drilling down into this idea of the social infrastructure centered around equity, inclusion, social justice. And how do we gain those things through our investments in not just stormwater infrastructure, but I talk about it more as a broader natural infrastructure. So money is medicine. What do we know already about how Karen described where we've come and where are we going? How do we get there? Well, what we know is that the health of our place really dictates the health of we, the people that live in that place, and the health of the economy and the community space. We know that funding for natural infrastructure has benefited predominantly whiter and wealthier communities and neighborhoods. And we know that communities of color are already suffering disproportionate impacts from climate change due to decades of disinvestment. So, how do we go from this concept and this drive for decolonizing wealth to the idea of community self-determination, where communities are driving the priorities for how public works dollars and lots of other infrastructure lands in their community? The Emerald Alliance has been piloting a new model for collaborative and community engagement, addressing those differentials in access to resource and power. So part of this process to get us from where we are now to where we want to be in self-determination at the community level starts with addressing the structural inequalities that we know exist in our funding programs and in our policy. And it addresses specifically, how do we disrupt the power dynamics for who has access to the resources and who benefits from the investments? We've been working on this model that really is two distinct groups with a firewall in between them, very intentionally so. One group of traditional, historically white-led conservation organizations, and there are only 5. And another group of people of color that represent community-based organizations. And this model of capacity in different respects is showing us how that model of engagement, trust-based, protecting the communities from where we are as our historically white-led in our journeys in becoming trusted partners. What does that model look like? And how can that model inform the funding that's coming down at the community scale? What does it look like if we think of that as social infrastructure? And I just want to call it a couple of examples of where we know that this disruption of how power and where resources reside, how that's already changing and where we see examples of it. In King County, participatory budgeting. Community members drawn together, they have a pot of money and they direct how that money gets invested at the community level for their own benefit. Okay. Here in Washington State, the HEAL Act mentioned this morning and numerous times. This is how disruption's happening for community organizations to engage with our state agencies as they are determining how funding is flowing down to meet community needs. What does that look like? What does that disruption look like? 2 years into the process, they've come out with a report to report on where that needs to go forward with some really solid recommendations about what's working and what needs to change. Cooperative grant making in the philanthropic sector we're seeing where community groups and advisory groups are directing that distinctly different from how philanthropic dollars have traditionally flown. And our community-centric fundraising effort here in our region, also now worldwide actually, reimagining philanthropy and access. And I mentioned federal dollars through the Environmental Protection Agency. And I know we have some of our EPA colleagues today. It's exciting to see where these dollars through environmental and climate justice and these new grant programs, how we can leverage that to build this social infrastructure, leaving that lasting legacy. And the last one here on the slide is a relatively newly created funding model in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, that involves the city of Annapolis. If you're familiar with that infrastructure, that landscape, it's a lot of shoreline and there's a lot of flooding. And what they wanted to do in this, the reason they created this was self-determination. This is not specific to racial and social justice, but this is the county officials and the city officials recognizing they didn't have enough control over how they were going to address climate resiliency. And they needed a more flexible funding structure in order to do it. And they needed more than taxpayer dollars to do it. So they had, we're already ahead of them. We didn't need state legislative authority here in the state to create special purpose districts. They did in Maryland. They did that at the state level. They took it to the voters in Anne Arundel County and they approved a new resilience authority. It's a legal entity that operates separate from county government, community-driven leadership and accountable to the community. And it's predicated on this idea of more flexible funding, mixing funding, stretching out timelines for how that funding meets community needs. So it is that model, and what I've drawn from a number of these other examples and others that I've been hearing from you all today is that these are some of the threads of what self-determination looks like as we think about how to construct this social infrastructure to connect these federal resources to meet community needs. Co-creation and co-governance. It's no longer the top-down. This is community working alongside agency partners to get this work done. And that requires leadership across all those levels of government. Absolutely flexible, patient, community-driven funding. It was Tony this morning that talked about the time and the process of tribal planning. We need to adopt that model of tribal planning and the pace that that happens and the trust that gets built along the way. That's what our models have to look like when we're planning for infrastructure investments to the benefit of community, alongside community, not project by project, but a portfolio approach. The whole basket of the assets, not just infrastructure assets, but also the social capital that's really important as part of that community. Absolutely, all those projects that get imagined and co-created by community, it's got to be somebody's job to make sure that it's actually adding value at the community scale. And there's no way that it can be done unless it's done collaboratively. So I think of that, of self-determination, as this component of social infrastructure, that it exists in many places, but not in all the places that we need it to exist for that self-determination to be a reality. And again, what does that look like? It's project planning for natural infrastructure, but it's the workforce development. We'll hear from Hannah and colleagues about economic development and workforce development that has to reside in the community. So those benefits go to the community rather than outside, if and when that's possible. Engaging youth, engaging residents, and ensuring that it is adding value and benefit, lasting value and benefit to the community. So this is my next to last slide. How do we take all of the dollars, the $400 million coming through the Public Works Board, all of the money coming through our federal agencies down through our state government agencies, investing in green stormwater, other natural infrastructure projects, and use that to drive the social justice and the lasting community and climate resilience that we really all need to ensure that gets built. And ensuring that 10 years from now, in 2033, that social infrastructure exists, and we've all been part of helping to create it. Really important photo credits as part of my slides. And with that, I think we've left a few minutes for questions, but really to hear some of your thoughts about what we've been talking about in these two presentations. So turn back to Maria.
Thank you so much, Tracy and Karen, for putting that into perspective. Are there any questions from folks online or in the audience? What do we have? We have 5 minutes.
Thank you. In light of Sean's previous comments in the last presentation about having an objective and having a long-term vision, can you describe how the Public Works Board comes up with that budget? Is there like a plan that says, these are all the projects that we want to fund and therefore we make a budget request, or do you sort of get given money and then you just allocate what you have?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. I'll answer very quickly. First, every year, state agencies develop budget requests. And budget requests are usually for things like our 400 million, and there can be also policy requests, and that's improvements to statute to make things run more efficiently. But how do we come up with the 400 million? We actually do modeling, fiscal modeling. The budget analyst that is on staff at Commerce does that for us. And based on loan repayments, revenues, and the other uses of the Public Works Assistance Account beyond the Public Works Board, we actually started with a $350 million concept. And then the board said, no, let's go bold or go home. And so that was the mentality that we went after this summer. And our budget request is actually 425 million. We're really, really appreciative of the governor and very, very grateful that he put it in the budget for 400 million. We also we based it on the fact that each cycle that we have opened recently, we leave qualified projects on the table unfunded. And so that was part of it. We also did outreach to our customer base. You know, what else do you have in your plans? What might you be seeking for funding if we come up with funding? And so that built up a pipeline. And for traditional infrastructure, it's a $1 billion pipeline. Same holds true for broadband infrastructure. Remember those lean years when I said we didn't have any money? Well, we weren't the only ones that didn't have any money. And what happened? Backlog of infrastructure needs. And so that's where the 400 million came from. And so it's based on a whole bunch of forecasts, like the revenue forecast comes out on Monday. And that sort of influences where the legislature goes too with what they will appropriate. But that's really the bottom line of that. And it's sort of an annual thing. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
No one else has a question. I'd love to jump in. With Tracy, you talked about social capital and you talked about try to get out of the feedback zone, building that infrastructure. And that's a hard thing to fund, right? Like the Public Works Board probably can't fund just meetings or things like this event is definitely a social infrastructure event, and we cobble together funding from sponsors and your dollars spent on your tickets, and it's sort of community-based, almost grassroots. But do you see a interplay between the different ways that philanthropy and public funding and all that can weave together to build all the different things that need to be in place at once?
All in place at once. I'll just use a concrete example as a way to answer that. One of the things that I've heard from colleagues in the Forest Service, as an example of federal agency, having a mandate for Justice 40% of their climate-related funding must go to meet the needs of historically underinvested communities. But they will admit right up front, they don't know how to bridge that divide between where they sit in their federal agencies and how that money flows. How do they do that engagement? So one of the funding pieces could come from partnership agreements from our federal agencies that themselves want to build the capacity to connect their dollars at the community level and work through intermediaries. Many of you are in this room, the Emerald Alliance and others, to serve as helping to advise them of what that capacity looks like, but using their money to do it, using a partnership agreement that has more flexibility traditionally than a grant program. So that's just one way of leveraging some current funding from the federal agencies to help us figure out, because this is, we're at the beginning of this journey. I don't, if it sounds like we've got all the answers, we don't. We are learning as we go through this collaborative model, this cohort-based model, and learning, what are the components that we can share out that will help others build this. But we are looking at how do we draw funds from traditional philanthropy. We've got, and all of it is just to fund the small backbone, but how do we really use our, can we be a conduit to bring in some substantial dollars that really flow largely to support the efforts to build those advisors at the local level? Did that get to your question? Thanks.
There's one more question I see.
This is not a question, but I feel inspired by Aaron's question, and just I just had an exciting idea that I want to share with you, like right now, which is, what about totally flipping this script? You know how community-based organizations always have to, like the existing structures, they have to apply for grants. That's a big part of the structure. I just had this vision over there that all the funders have to apply to community-based organizations to be part of their really cool projects, and like totally flip it. Like the community organizations, like, we got this really cool project, we're doing it. You're welcome to fund us. I don't know, like a funding charrette. I don't know how that structure could happen, but
Super.
I just wanted to share the vision.
Thank
Really
you for
cool.
the Interesting idea.
Love that.
I saw the stop sign come, so Aaron, you wanted to transition us. Thank you very much, Karen and Tracy.
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much. Thanks, Maria.